we've got a lot to cover, and a lot of stuff that's sort of really current with Rebar's thinking and explorations. So we're excited to share what we've been working on with you, some of the plans we have for the future, and really looking forward to getting into a conversation with you at the end of the talk, actually, and getting some of your feedback on what we want to show you. Just a little bit of background, if you may not be familiar with sort of Rebar, the human side of Rebar that's just beyond the sort of blog entries or controversial news stories here and there. Rebar has three partners, John Bella, myself, and Matthew Passmore, and we occupy a space in the Mission, about a 5,000 square foot studio that contains a fabrication shop and a design studio, and we have several collaborators from the landscape architecture fields, architecture, product design, artists, and we really look at our space as kind of a manifestation of who we are. It's a space to make, and we make to think, and that kind of loop of making to think and trying things out very immediately is very central to our practice. And also an interdisciplinary approach is pretty central to our practice too. Although John and myself are landscape architects and practice landscape, what you'd call sort of real landscape architecture, we also work with a lot of people from different disciplines, and we look at the discipline as not an end in itself, but just a tool to being urbanists. Anyway, with that said, it's always good to just dive into a little military theory. The notion of strategy and tactic is what we wanted to talk to you about tonight. And this is really sort of fresh in our minds, and I want to warn you that some of this is kind of just new material, but it's a start to a conversation that we want to have. So this idea of strategy and tactic comes from military theory, and the strategy is, in essence, action at a distance. It is power removed from itself over geography. It is in control of space and time. It is a plan. It's long-term. A tactic, on the other hand, is short-term. It looks for the gaps in strategy. It looks for opportunities. So while a strategy is about planning, a tactic is about doing. Strategy might be about large-scale action, tactic is small-scale. Strategy is concerned with the why, and maybe the tactic is concerned with the how. A strategy is difficult to copy. It's so big and so complicated and so invested in the power structure that it's sort of a one-of-a-kind, whereas a tactic can be replicated over and over again. It's sort of like a virus. And this is the duality, right, between strategy and tactic that we've come to understand is kind of a given in maybe military theory, and military theory that gets borrowed into other disciplines. So the strategy looks to the where, when, with what and whom, and the tactic looks at the how. So urbanism has started to borrow this language, right? And that's why we're here to have a talk about, tactical urbanism, because this is a term that's actually started to show up enough that I think it's become commonplace. And you can look to sort of the theoreticians about strategy and tactics. I think it's been pretty much borrowed kind of wholesale into the urban dialogue. And the idea sort of in urbanism, I think, is that strategic actors, which is really us, right? It's planners and architects and landscape architects and designers, people in government, sort of draw the lines around what's possible and what's permissible. And there's sort of this line in the sand that gets drawn. And then a tactical actor comes along and steps over that line. And in doing so, the line gets kind of reevaluated and redrawn, perhaps. So, a few examples. You can maybe see, Baron von Haussmann's approach to regridding Paris as a strategic response to the riots and blockades, and Les Mis. You can look at sort of modernism as our most, vital, important kind of manifestation of a strategic plan in the last century, and its counterpart in the tactical response of the natural kind of building of cities that's organic and looking for gaps in that strategic framework. And you can look at the sort of archetypal strategist thinking about his plans versus the guy who is looking for a place to practice his own art within those plans. You have a master builder on one hand, you have a community advocate on the other. But I want to pose that this dualism is maybe something we need to move beyond, actually. Because it's a useful thing to think about that cycle, but really you have, on one hand you have sort of, the guerrilla tactical urbanist who maybe looks like this, but on the other hand you have the guerrilla gardener who's actually Camilla, the Duchess of Wales out there. And this has just kind of been absorbed wholesale into our thinking about urbanism now, which tactical urbanism is a thing. It's a thing that architects practice, planners practice. And you have books about the subject. You have actually designers practicing great design, practicing really creative design on a sort of tactical level. Think appropriating, manifesting in the cracks and crevices of urban life. You have the Atlantic cities publishing, pictures like this about doing yoga in the streets. So I want to kind of ask, what is going on? How has the design profession sort of gotten outside of itself to think that it needs a solution that's not design but sort of direct action? You have the CNU publishing pictures like this, and then scholarly publications on the subject. So I want to suggest that maybe this is less of a dualism and more of a kind of a creative cycle, a yin yang. And we as the tacticians and the strategists, maybe in the same room, I think we need to get a little bit more smart and more honest about what's actually happening, what's going on. So that's sort of the preamble, but I want to take you back to 2005, right at the sort of start of Rebar's existence as a collection of artists and designers. And the thing that was inspiring us at that time was Gordon Maddock Clark's Fake Estates project. Maddock Clark worked in the 70s and was, he died untimely and before some of his projects were realized, but he was taking a look at these slivers and slices of land that were created as a result of surveying errors around New York City and in Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx, and he was finding these little spots that were like 1 or 2 feet long by 100 feet deep, and trying to figure out what could you do with those spaces. And we were inspired by that, and kind of looking at San Francisco at the time, we started thinking, what are the equivalent spaces in San Francisco? And it turns out that the metered parking space is probably the best exploitable niche in the urban environment. It's for $2 in 2005, you could rent 200 square feet of valuable urban real estate for $2. And so we did an experiment, and I'm curious, like, how many people here have seen parking project? So all of us have seen this, but this is where it started, was in this parking space in 2005. We unrolled turf, a tree, and some sod, the constituent elements of an urban park, something that is sort of easily recognizable. And before too long, this guy in the blue, he came down and started eating a pizza and took off his shoes. And then this guy came down and sat on the tree, and they didn't talk to each other for a long time. But they looked at each other after a while, and then they nodded. We're hanging out in the park. So before too long, we put this up on a website, and it got so much attention that people started inviting us around the world to install parking installations in their city. And we, having spent our last $500 on the just shown parking installation, didn't, have the means to sort of fly around the world and install this everywhere. So, taking a page out of the open source movement, the Creative Commons movement, we created a how-to manual. so that people could do this themselves. And we established a day, Parking Day, the next year, the third Friday in September. And you know, the results have been pretty interesting. It is really boomed around the world, and it's been interesting to kind of see it ripple out from San Francisco. It's a native San Francisco, you know, offering to the world. Like San Francisco offers so much to the world. This is something that emanated out of here, and it has grown to, you know, Los Angeles, to Italy, to Glasgow, Scotland, to Manchester, England. These are a couple of city councilors, Korea, and this is one of my favorites, to Tehran, and all over the world. And it's blossomed in the sort of, you know, variety of people who take part in it. It's blossomed in its aims. So, you know, this one is in front of City Hall. It's actually an official city-sanctioned parking installation. Each wheelbarrow has a dahlia, San Francisco city flower, and you can put notes for your supervisor in there. So it's becoming a means for political conversation, you know, or, you know, creative cultural repurposing of public space, proposing new, you know, food systems or ecologies. And really one of my favorites is, you know, this is a park on Cesar Chavez at Van Ness, and it's a day laborer health care checkup clinic and traffic calming information station. And so, you know, we would have never thought that that was something that people would want to do with this 200 square feet. But having opened up that typology of space and given permission for people to do something with it, it all of a sudden becomes a vessel for tactical responses to culture, politics, you name it. So how did this one thing sort of blossom into all of these different, you know, ideas around the globe? In 2011, last year, that we have numbers for, 975 parks, 162 cities, 35 countries, 6 continents, everywhere except Antarctica. A challenge to all of you Antarcticans out there. So that's parking. It's kind of an interesting thing. It's sort of, it has a life of its own, and it is our tactical action, but it also is a blueprint for other people's tactical action as well. And the reason why this resonated, and I'm now going to sort of get back into the history of what was happening at the time. So in 2006, 2007, cities around the country were looking at, what do you do with this public space that we have? I mean, you know, 32% of our city, San Francisco, is streets. 68% is everything else. So that's pretty good. A third is our commons. But of that third, 25% is devoted to the human being, directly sort of supporting the life of the human body. 75% is devoted to the storage and movement of private automobiles. So realizing that there's sort of an imbalance in our allocation of space to our values. At the time, the city of New York had been visited by Jan Gehl, and Jeanette Sadik-Khan in New York, transportation director, was sort of trying some new things, like painting the asphalt on Broadway Street, Times Square, taking over space with super light, cheap, quick means. In Los Angeles, the same sorts of things were underfoot. In San Francisco, city planners had seen Parking Day and said, well, what can we do here? And that's how San Francisco's Parklet program was born. We were active in trying to shape the Parklet program and the permit system to really not just exchange a private use for a private use, so not just exchange a cafe or a car for some, you know, a place where you have to buy something to sit there, but really have a space that's open to all no matter what. We came up with our own kind of offering, a modular system that could be rearranged depending on changing needs of the street, and in sort of an iterative process, learning from the street. And we've installed, I think at last count, there's about 11 parklets that we've done around the city. Davis, California, the Mission, North Beach. And at the same time, the city was looking to larger scales of kind of, you know, these urban niches and saying, well, what do we do with excess asphalt. You know, there's plenty of places that are overbuilt, over-asphalted for the amount of traffic that goes through. And the Pavement to Parks program extended into other spaces, like this space on 16th and Wisconsin in Potrero Hill, known as Showplace Triangle. The city came and asked us to come up with a design for this space. What would you do if you had something super light, quick, cheap to test a long-term idea of a plaza, but do a first draft? And we came up with this and literally drew the plaza on the street. That's John Bella with a shotgun. And got DPW's crews out there, started cutting the pavement, putting irrigation lines in, took those granite slabs from days of yore on Market Street and repurposed them, sewer pipes, planners, used the templates for the street markings, and hired a graffiti artist to paint the debris boxes. The city quickly repainted them in less offensive colors. And quickly created a plaza on top of the street, which became a place for people to relax and play. And if you've been by there lately, how many people have been by there lately? Did you notice it's gone? The whole thing has been swept up. So what's happening is the city has taken a couple years to learn from the design, and they're now going to do a second draft with much more funding and do a permanent design on the street, learning from this, which we're involved in. So that's Showplace. I'm going to just tell you a quick story here before I hand it over to John about a kind of another thread in our practice, which we call social furniture. And the first time we discovered what social furniture was, we had kind of thrown gumball, Adamat, Merkin, furry colony swarm into a blender and come up with bushwaffle, as I'm sure you would, given the same ingredients, which was basically an urban personal space softening device that you could buy from a vending machine for the price of lunch. And we looked at this as a way to kind of prototype new urban situations, swarm a kind of new spatial typology that could riff off of existing conditions in the city. And we've brought this to Amsterdam, Boston, up and down the West Coast, Paris, and it's been really fun to use this as an instrument to sort of unleash user-generated urbanism on these places. And this has evolved into another project called Bubbleware, which we designed for a project in Sydney. And here it is, kind of, it's, you know, the sort of cousin of bushwaffle being used in the Sydney laneways. So what we've shown so far is sort of a smaller scale of this kind of idea of three parts of the umbrella of strategy and tactics, and thinking about kind of what can you do beyond that dualism. One is, you know, iterate in the design process. Do a first draft or create an object that can be rearranged and reused so that it's not all about kind of investing in that final solution right away. Open source urbanism. How do you create an assembly manual, a code that's sticky, that goes, that travels? And bureaucracy. People like Jeanette Saidak-Khan or Andres Power in San Francisco, who are able to kind of see the value of tests and trials and work within the city to open up the possibility for those to happen and try it before things get shut down in a public process. So, small scale things. John's going to talk about some larger scale things.